report on the motion regarding Enhanced Increment Financing District. And we have Jenny Scanlon from the EWDD to provide our report. And I think that it needs to be read for the record.
Item 1 is the Economic and Workforce Development Department to report in response to motion O'Farrell Blumenfield Price relative to the feasibility of creating an enhanced infrastructure financing district along the Los Angeles River to support restoration and maintenance of the river and river-adjacent communities.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. As I understand it, this report was submitted today, so it was not transmitted. So there are some recommendations in the report, and I will read those into the record at the end. But I want to sort of start with some summary and background before I get into the recommendations. We received a motion from your committee in October requesting us, in collaboration with the CAO, CLA, and BOE, to report on the feasibility of creating an enhanced infrastructure finance district for the revitalization of the Los Angeles River and its adjacent communities. In January of 2015, SB 628 was chaptered and became effective. The motion that was presented in October was in relation to this specific piece of state legislation. And in January 12th of 2015, we were able to provide an oral presentation to your committee that summarized the content of SB 628 and what we consider to be its potential usefulness to assist the city in financing a variety of facility, infrastructure, and development projects. So today what we have is a report which hopes to address the intent of the original motion, but also takes a step back to further describe and evaluate enhanced infrastructure finance districts in general, as we anticipate the interest in this tool goes beyond the boundaries of the Los Angeles River. I know you have a packed agenda, so I'm just going to spend a few minutes taking some broad brushstrokes in generating a picture of enhanced infrastructure finance districts and how the city might consider them as a tool, and then I'll get into the specific recommendations and the recommendations for the river. And although an enhanced infrastructure finance district can be used to expedite and short financing for catalytic projects, we know that the adoption process for an EIFD is an intensive process that will require early dedication of city resources and funding and the cooperation of the county as well as other affected taxing entities in order to be effective. Based on this, the Enhanced Infrastructure Finance District is based on the state's Infrastructure Finance District model with sort of three exceptions which make it, I think, more interesting to us as a city. And one, it's the simplification of the adoption process, an expansion of the sources of financing available to be used within that structure, and an increase in the project types that can be funded. Initially, I'll talk about governance. The Enhanced Infrastructure Finance District is governed by what's called a public financing authority. This is a limited legislative agency. Under the legislation, there are sort of two paths to membership. If the city were to adopt an enhanced infrastructure finance district that only included funds coming directly out of the city's taxes, then that membership would include 3 council members and 2 members of the public. If we were if we adopted an enhanced infrastructure finance district that incorporated taxes or tax increment from other affected taxing entities, then the membership is a majority of members of those various legislative bodies, and then a minimum of 2 members of the public appointed by the legislative bodies. In terms of the range of projects that can be accomplished, so whereas infrastructure finance districts were really focused on public facilities and obviously infrastructure, streets, roads, sewers, flood control channels, this really expands the definition of what can be done, and it focuses on other alternative projects like affordable housing. You can put funding into commercial development. You can put funding into industrial development. You can look at using the funds to move forward transit-oriented priority projects or sustainable community projects. So it really expands the platform on which we could fund specific projects in communities that are currently in need of those projects getting done. The boundaries that you would set for enhanced infrastructure finance districts are really set by both the priorities that you want to fulfill, what are the projects that you want to accomplish, and what tax increment can you actually pull out of those areas. So those sort of two factors will define your boundary. We know that the projects that are in the plan for that district have to be considered to be of community-wide benefit to that district. So there is a nexus between the boundary of the district, the project list of what's in the infrastructure plan, and obviously, ultimately, you want to make sure that you have enough tax increment coming in from the properties that are incorporated into that plan. So I talked a little bit about the funding mechanism. So it is the basically thrust of the funding comes from tax increment financing. This is existing, or this is your property tax as it potentially grows into the future. So you're creating a baseline at the time that you adopt the infrastructure finance district, and then it's really any increment that exceeds that baseline that can be tapped to go back into these projects or these plans. The different taxing entities have the opportunity. So here's where, again, it's a little bit different from, its counterpart under redevelopment when you used to use tax increment financing. In this case, the taxing entities have that ability to voluntarily, under this legislation, voluntarily provide their tax increment financing. They do not have to put anything in. They can put a percentage in. They can put all of it in. So there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of volunteerism involved in this process. And it also excludes tax increment financing that would go to any school district or community college district or county board of education. So you can't tap into those funds. So that's sort of where this bill, again, differentiates from some of the tools that we had prior to this. The report talks...
Repeat the delineation of those aspects that are excluded.
Oh, what you cannot, yes. So there are, in terms of who we cannot tap for funding, correct, or projects that we can. We cannot use funding out of the school districts, the community college district, or the county board of education. There are some exclusions I didn't talk about, but are in the report on what you can and cannot spend funding on. So some of the things that you can't spend funding on would be sort of ongoing maintenance and services that normally the municipality would typically provide. So that's not unusual. The report talks about the adoption process because I think it's important to understand a time frame in which we could actually implement something like this. And really overall, we're looking at, on average, at least a year, if not probably more likely more than a year, before any proposal for an enhanced infrastructure finance district could get through this sort of stepped process into sort of an adoption phase. The process starts officially under the legislation with what's called a resolution of intention. This is a resolution that the City Council would have to take, and it's actually a very simple resolution that establishes the boundary, establishes that you would be looking at using tax increment. It's very general, but it's an important sort of moment or place in time, because once you set that boundary under that resolution, you can't expand it, you can contract it and manipulate it sort of downwards, but you're not going to be able to expand the boundary. So we think it's important, and one of the things that we talk about in this report is that the city needs to engage in doing a lot of sort of pre-planning for this before we get to anything like a resolution of intention, if we are going to take this tool seriously and consider using it. And so we do make some recommendations that talk about, as motions go forward, that you need to think about setting aside funds. We say no less than $75,000 to look at preliminary financial models that would be based on various boundaries for each area, and would look at different levels of participation from affected taxing entities. We also suggest that initially you consider establishing a working group that would review preliminary findings and find consensus to create a general work plan, and that be done up front, and consider that work group to include, obviously, interested parties within the city, as well as potentially incorporating some of the taxing entities that you're hoping to partner with on that EIFD. And I think, ultimately, if you can get through that pre-planning process and still consider that you've got a feasible plan, both financially as well as politically, then you would move forward into adopting the resolution of intention. Because once you adopt that resolution, you're going to have to notice the affected taxing entities that you are looking at creating an enhanced infrastructure finance district, and you're going to have to notice all of the landowners in the area that you've set for your boundary. So it really becomes a reality once you get to that step. From that step, you
So
then...
you're saying it's unlikely that, for example, an entire district would be designated, but only portions in the district?
I think that, again, is going to depend on looking at the sort of baseline set of projects that you want to accomplish and the cost of those projects, and then how much tax increment you think you will be able to achieve within that boundary that you're going to set. And again, that's going to be based not only on hopefully what the city's tax increment is and how much percentage the city wants to put in, but also whether the county is interested. Because quite honestly, without the county's funds coming in, it's not that interesting a tool. Because we already have control over our tax increment. It's our general fund. And so you guys already have the ability through various other ways and means within the city to commit that funding, that money to projects.
So colleagues, I'm going to recommend this. So Ms. Scanlon, you're in your presentation, you're going to get to a few instances that will where you'll be able to refer directly to river uses you mentioned. So let's let her finish the presentation, then we'll open up for questions, because the question you just asked and partially the question you asked, Mr. Cedillo, is on my list as well. So finish your presentation, and then we'll open up and maybe go into the territory of how it could benefit the river.
Absolutely. So just to finish off the process very quickly so everyone understands the complexity of it, once you've gotten past the resolution of intention, you've done your noticing, you then start to create this infrastructure finance plan, which goes into this very intensive level of detail on financial impacts, what it is that you're planning to do. You take that in front of the council. The council hears it under public hearing. You want to make sure that all the other taxing entities that are going to be participating have already resolved their participation and have taken their own resolutions forward. That then goes in front of you as the final legislative body to make determinations on the district. Once you've set the district and you've created a public financing authority, which happens sort of in parallel, then the district is up and running by all intents and purposes. And so any tax increment that then is achieved goes into that public financing authority. Some of the things to think about, again, moving into the future is if you adopt these infrastructure finance districts, how does that public financing authority achieve those projects and achieve its goals and administer itself? It's probably likely that those public financing authorities will need to contract back to the city, the county, or another public agency to actually move forward on any of those plans. And again, these are long-term plans. You're looking at the life of these districts being at least 45 years in most cases. So these are long and intentional plans with a presumed fairly structured but large set of projects to achieve. So getting into we think in general this is an interesting tool for the city to consider. We think that it is a meaningful tool. It obviously is one that needs to be looked at in terms of how it will impact our own bottom line on the general fund and what benefits would be achieved by it, and sort of balance those two as we move forward if there are projects that we want to look at or districts that we want to create. And as it relates to the river, I think what we realized, we did a very cursory review of the potential for adopting a district in or around the 32 miles of the river as it lays within the city of Los Angeles. We know that property values are going up. We know that it's very likely that tax increment will be generated within those boundaries. It is significant. Is it significant enough to cover, the entire costs of something like the Alternative 20? Probably not. It needs to be obviously considered as one of hopefully a series of tools to help with river revitalization. And I think that we also think that there is a pull, sort of a pull to use those funds outside of just the river and the flood control channel itself, but also within the communities. And I think that your motion spoke to that, and I want to acknowledge that, each of these districts is probably going to want to develop a plan that looks at those communities, those adjacent communities, and what else needs to be done to enhance or revitalize those existing communities. So we make a recommendation that obviously will move this forward sort of to the next step. It's not a big step, but we're going to baby step it. So I'll just go through the series of recommendations that we made. The first being really a general recommendation for that the city as a whole should consider developing what we call an EIFD establishment policy, because we know that there's going to be an interest in looking at these in various other parts of the city. And so we think that it's important for our department to work with the CLA and CAO, Mayor's Office, and City Attorney to potentially draft that policy for you so that you can consider kind of a structure by which we would actually move through some of these ideas or concepts for enhanced infrastructure finance districts. We also suggest authorizing the establishment of an account under the controller called the River Revitalization EIFD and appropriate $75,000 for consultant and noticing services with a source to be identified by CD13, and that we prepare associated control instructions as necessary. And then ultimately that our department, EWDD, in collaboration with the CLA, CAO, Mayor's Office, Bureau of Engineering, and river-adjacent council offices take steps necessary to prepare a resolution of intention for one or more river revitalization EIFDs, including but not limited to determining the EIFD's proposed boundaries, goals, and projects to be funded. So I think I'll end there and let you consider that and ask any questions you want.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jenny. Just some questions that I have. Can you further articulate the revenue sources? For example, the percentages that the city receives from property taxes, the county, where you envision the percentage coming from to fund an EIFD along the river. I want to make sure that I understand this correctly. The range of the percentage, once the dust settles and we figure out a specific percentage amount of the tax increment increases. Mm-hmm. So if you could expand on that a little bit, and then lastly, what, if any, are there impacts to the general fund with that arrangement?
So I can't give you exact percentages, but I would say that the of the property tax dollar that comes in, any $1 gets split. Obviously, I think the majority goes to the schools or for schools to the county and to the city. The county maybe gets between 30 and 40%. The city gets between 20 and 30%. So, and then you have these smaller taxing entities, mosquito abatement district, flood control. All of those taxing entities also receive a very small percentage. And so, again, knowing that we have to exclude all of the taxes that would go to the school, the amount of funds that you'd be looking at is maybe between 50 to 60% of that property tax dollar. And again, it's only the new dollar coming in. And so that's probably the percentage of funds that you'd have to play with. In terms of its impact on the general fund, that is something that will have to be considered as we move forward. And I think it really relates back to, this is new money coming in, and so it's not money that you've already spent, but in some ways, when the city bonds, its bonds are based on presumptions about future general fund and how your general fund will increase over time. And so we're going to have to take a deep dive into what has already been considered or obligated to pay for or repay existing bonds that the city has already invested in. So that all of that has to be considered, and we can't. We obviously have to be fiscally prudent, and we would not put forward anything that would endanger those pre-existing commitments. And so that's something that obviously we will have to look at, and I know that the CAO would help us with that analysis.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Councilmember LaBonge, joining Councilmembers Price, Cedillo, and myself. Welcome, Mr. LaBonge. And a follow-up question to that, Jenny, is, so, for example, if the county take of property taxes existing is between 30 and 40%, we could ostensibly negotiate with the county on an agreed-upon percentage that could be reinvested right back into the county flood control channel, for example, that has much jurisdiction over the river through the city of Los Angeles.
Yes.
And perhaps other areas of the county, and we could have a sort of a collective approach that could ostensibly not even impact the city of Los Angeles General Revenue Fund whatsoever. That could be one of the arrangements, if I understand this correctly. Theoretically.
Theoretically, yes. Any taxing entity can put in whatever funds they want, and again, any taxing entity, the county or the city can take this resolution of intention forward. The presumption is that if the city is going to take the resolution of intention forward, that the city is going to do so because it's going to put in its own tax increment. If it's really just a county set of projects and county facilities, it's more likely that the county would take those actions. But
right, but I'm talking in terms of a county-city partnership,
right,
which we could go in that direction. And just to be clear, it's also not a taking of existing funding. It's the incremental increases in the tax collections
absolutely
that happen with the rise in real estate value.
right.
And it's not a tax increase, and it's not a taking of current monies. And again, once we identify the boundaries, what could some of the sub-areas look like? We've had a few conversations, and I know you've been looking at this a lot, but since we're looking at the river as a whole, possibly even looking at the river the entire 51-plus miles through the city and county.
Yeah, so we have a ton of flexibility there. I mean, we can engage other districts outside our municipalities outside of the county, so we could partner with our adjacent cities who have interest in the river as well and take in boundaries that go beyond the city of LA's property lines. So it could be broad enough to incorporate that 52 miles. We could restrict it to the 32 miles of that's really focused in on the Rio and the area that we control. If we're looking at specific communities, you could take it down to a community level. One of the things that the report talks about is this concept of layering. where you could adopt a very broad, large infrastructure finance district or enhanced infrastructure finance district that covers a very large portion of the city, other cities, and possibly the county. Take a very small percentage of tax increment from each of those jurisdictions and put that in to just focus on river revitalization on a presumption that the river is a general asset that benefits a very, very broad part of the city. And then you could, on top of that, adopt smaller enhanced infrastructure finance districts that are really more community-based and put in another sort of level or layer of infrastructure financing districts or tax increment on top of that. So that, again, gets into some complexities, but that is a possibility and is very much allowed by the legislation.
Okay. And when do you mentioned a minimal one-year timeline to get a district off the ground. I would imagine that's very generous to think that it could be
Yes.
done in a year, but I'm thinking maybe up to 2 years. When do you think it would make sense to approach the county? Do you think it would make sense after we get council approval to, proceed on this quest? What do you think?
Well, I hope that we can create a policy where we have a point-in-time engagement, sort of where we do things sort of in a more rigorous manner. But I think that in general we need to go very early on to the county before, as I said, it's a time-consuming process. It's an expensive process. Before we head down that path, it's probably very important for us to talk to the county and see what level of interest they have, and gauge that, because I think that's probably the first cut on whether we want to proceed forward or not.
Okay.
So I would say, right out of the planning gate, we should be approaching the county and talking to them.
And at least informally
Absolutely.
from the start, if not formally a little bit down the line.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions I have for now. Colleagues?
Yes. So tell me about I don't see that there's a prohibition. I thought I saw language in here about affordability.
No,
So that
absolutely
the
not.
district could be used for affordability. It could also receive, I'm going to be at a hearing later this week about receiving some funds based upon a bank merger. It could also receive those types of funds. So they could take big infusions. Let's say we got an agreement with the state. They could also
Yeah.
receive those, and we could designate them for affordability.
Yeah, the Public Financing Authority has the ability to enact fees, to enact assessments. It has the ability to receive other funds. It has the ability to accept loans. It has a very broad financial authority.
The city's ready to embark on this mandate on this seismic retrofit. It's a huge endeavor. We've got to get inventory of all our buildings, public and private. We've got the rent control ordinance. We've got a whole lot of other factors involved. One of the commitments we've made is to make sure that we try to create funding so that the cost of the retrofit doesn't become a pass-through to tenants. And would this infrastructure entity be one where we could park those types of funds?
You could, that is, the retrofitting of certain buildings could be potentially eligible. I think we'd have to just look at it and just make sure that it meets the eligibility expense. So if we're, again, anything that falls under affordable housing is eligible, and anything related to the creation or assistance of market rate housing is not eligible. So I think it's going to depend on how we categorize that, but possibly.
And then for our publicly owned buildings?
Our publicly owned buildings, we have the ability to use this model to expand them, and but we cannot replace them. So you can't basically build a new building that's you had a 20,000 square foot facility, you're just going to build a new one that's basically covering the exact same amount of services and the exact same intent. You can't do that, but you can rehab, you can
Retrofit.
improve, you can expand existing facilities.
Questions? Mr. Price?
Thanks for the presentation. This is an exciting tool with lots of promise. This is not assigned to the ED committee, Economic Development Committee, but I'm anxious for us to hear it in that committee as well, perhaps with a broader expansion of exactly what's possible, not limited to the river, but in terms of the bigger picture of economic development in our city, especially as it impacts those areas of need. So,
I'd be happy to present to that committee.
all right.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, this is a new tool, fresh off the press. Mr. LeBon?
Just a question, and I see the city engineers here. If you put the San Gabriel River, which has primarily been facilitated by the County of Los Angeles, all the way down to Long Beach, and their attempts, have we looked and ever put the Los Angeles River next to the San Gabriel River, and what type of benefits have occurred in this last 20 years of the river movement? Mr. Moore, Gary Lee Moore.
Mr. LeBon, do you want Gary on the spot to give a 20-year comprehensive report of all the
No,
accomplishments?
not
San Gabriel and Los
not
Angeles River?
accomplishments, but I mean, have you ever looked at them side by side and seen what? Okay, I just, as a friendly amendment, that we should look at it side by side. The late great Dorothy Green was one of the finest people in our region, and she got the county to really go forward on much was in the San Gabriel River, which all their bikeways are finished, Mitch. Now, they do not have the impact of the railroads that we have in central Los Angeles and some of the old historic structures, but they are really, I think, a little bit ahead of us. Plus, also, the northern part of the San Gabriel is all natural fed bottom with some side. But anyway, I think it's worth a look at, and then to see as far as the development, as far as economic development. And I would just put this out here. I truly think there should be a water park for the children of Los Angeles somewhere along the river, whether it's in the New Ninth or in the New First or the 13th or wherever it is, that people could experience something that's special, because people love water, kids love water. So I just put that out in the back of that. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, before we start entertaining a friendly amendment to include the San Gabriel River,
What the point is, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, let me just make
Okay.
it clear. Who's the CLA here? Okay, I want you to look at the San Gabriel River, tell us what's going on, and just call the county, and they'll send out what they have done the last 20 years. Just see what we do, compare it, and it's something to look at.
I like that idea too, but I would prefer that as a separate instruction, not attached to this particular motion.
Okay, I'll make a separate motion for the CLA and charge the city $912 for the motion.
No, I'm all about gathering all the information.
I got it.
Best practices on all the adjacent waterways, and God knows we covered that in the lead up
Let me
to
just
the
ask a quick question.
master plan.
Gary Lee Moore, could you do that in your work program? Just a cursory, not deep, but just look at the San Gabriel, what they've done, and look at the LA River? Is that simple? Or do I need to do a motion and tell you to do it?
I will look at it.
God, for us?
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you. Okay, that's all. I take my friendly amendment and put it in his pocket. Friendly amendment.
It looks to me, Madam Clerk, that we have one comment card on item 1. We have, and then it looks like we have a general comment, and this is from Mr. Hayes. Is that correct? Okay, so we have one comment card then on item 1. And seeing as no further questions at the moment, Ms. Scanlon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hayes, please step forward.
Councilmember Cedillo corrected himself when he used the term money. He chuckled and said funds. What's wrong with saying money in a politician? Is that a dirty word?
I said months. I'm put them together. That's why I just corrected that.
Anyway,
It's all good, either one.
my time is running, sir. Please, I have no time for conversation with you.
Continue,
appreciate
Mr.
that.
Hayes.
All right. Something about restoration of the river. It's a concrete viaduct right now. Are you actually contemplating removing the concrete and restoring it to its natural order? It's natural. I doubt that. This is not a transit river. It's not even a pleasure river. Has anyone at the fire department or rescue teams discussed what happens when you have flowing water and human beings in it? It's not like the ocean. It's very dangerous. People are constantly pressed out of the river every time we have a light rainstorm here in Los Angeles County. And so it might be not a good idea to open up a river with all the hazards that take place. Understand, health is an aspect of your committee's concern. Now, since it's not a transit route, I believe that you should pay attention to transit routes like the Crenshaw LAX line. Theoretically going to the airport, which it does not do. It's a lie. It doesn't go there. And it goes up and down 5 times before it gets to its destination. The blue line was similar, being on grade. It has killed more than 100 people since its inception. And if you put a train on the ground, you're going to kill people. But you don't hesitate to do that. India has 5 trains underground, emerging from third world status, but we cannot afford to save the lives of black people on Crenshaw by putting a train underground.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Seeing as there are no other comments on item 1, colleagues, what I would like to do is move the EWDD report forward with some recommendations, though, and those are as followed. Amend recommendation 1 to state, direct the Economic and Workforce Development Department in consultation with the CLA, CAO, and any other entity as needed to draft and implement an EIFD establishment policy, directing the process for initiating a study and adopting an EIFD for a general area or project. And furthermore, B, which is item 4 on the recommendation, on the report, to be consistent with 1, is amend recommendation 4 to state, direct the Economic and Workforce Development Department in consultation with the CLA, CAO, and any other entity as needed, again, to take steps necessary to prepare a resolution of intention for 1 or more river revitalization EIFDs, including but not limited to determining the EIFD's proposed boundaries, goals, and projects to be funded. These amendments give us more flexibility in our approach to this, and so I would move that we make those amendments to the recommendations without objection.
Second.
Thank you. Seeing as there's no objection, then this item carries, and we move the report forward. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Colleagues, if there are no actually there is a public comment card on item 2, and then there's a general public comment card. So what I'm going to recommend, colleagues, is that we move items 3 and 5 on consent without objection, and we'll just hold 2 for the one public comment that we have. And we can go ahead and move items 3 and 5 forward on consent without objection.
Just a giant thank you letter should send out to the LA 84 Foundation for their constant help. Anybody here from LA 84? Okay. Okay, good, thank you.
Enrique Hurtado is here. Thank you, Enrique. All right, so we'll move items 3 and 5, and then, Madam Clerk, if you could read item 2, and then we'll take the public comment on item 2 only.
Item number 2 is the Department of Recreation and Parks report and resolution relative to a grant application for the State of California Department of Housing and Community Development Housing-Related Parks Program for the 2014 designated program year for various parks and recreation facilities.
Thank you. And so item 2, again, Mr. Hayes, please provide your public comment.
Leimert Park is not a city park. The city doesn't own it. The city doesn't control it. The city doesn't do anything except maintain it. And they do a very poor job of that. But nevertheless, the city has decided to put a Crenshaw Line train stop at Leimert Park. Currently, Leimert Park is a homeless encampment. There are tents there, shopping carts, all the things that go along with homelessness. But 1 block away at the mall, there's also a train stop. But the train stop at the Leimert Park is going to cost $140 million at a homeless encampment. Why? Who would do such a thing? Who cannot walk 1 block? Understand the train stop for the Red Line for Civic Center is almost 3 blocks away from Dorothy Chandler Disney, but there's no train stop there. Not even a shuttle bus. But there's a train stop at the Leimert Park at $140 million. Because of the boondoggle. It's the way you politicians get your money back for all the good things you do for that developer. Now, we would like to take that $140 million and put that train underground. You claim we can't put it underground because grade is so much cheaper, and we can afford that, even though at grade means the cost of human beings' lives. So, what are you going to do now? Are any of you gentlemen and perhaps ladies brave enough to reverse this action and save lives of people along Crenshaw? You've devastated the environment. All the trees have been cut down. Some of the tallest trees we ever had in the city have been cut down. The environment has been destroyed. And now you're set to destroy human beings. Your task, gentlemen, and we will encourage you, stop this murderous train before it's launched.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Colleagues, unless you would like to hear from the Recreation and Parks Department on this item, I suggest that we move it forward.
I just want one suggestion, because you were just talking about the river. Who's here from the Rec and Parks on this? Hi. If you can just see, Mr. O'Farrell, I know when they redistrict Chevy Chase Park, you know Chevy Chase Park? And Atwater next to the CSY?
I am honestly not familiar with
Okay.
Chevy Chase Park. No.
Well, Mr. O'Farrell, I'll send you a letter, just because there was a motion that I had. Chevy Chase Park is next to the Central Service Yard, which I know you know, Gary. And at Central Service Yard, there's the urban forestry, which are great tree trimmers. But could they be relocated away from the river so we could unfold that area and add it to the Chevy Chase natural zone that you helped create in the state? So,
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc.
Okay.
So we'll get to your response, but we are working on a separate, we're exploring revitalizing that area and actually using part of the Central Service Yard, as you're aware.
yeah, just move the trucks in the back.
Incorporating all of it for a river use
Yeah.
sort of public amenity.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's a
yeah,
motion
no,
pending before this committee.
I got it.
On the latter
Is that
item.
my motion?
It's my motion. I believe you seconded.
Second, but I want my motion still here. I only got 17 weeks, so I want to at least get my motion on the merry-go-round. And I don't want to relocate. They have the best trailers of any unit. I don't need to move electricity or anything. Just we relocate the trucks and they do that. I see a Commissioner of Public Works. They're smiling, so that's good. Okay. Thank you, Mitch.
You bet.
Josephine Atkinson, Grants Administration, Department of Recreation and Parks. Item 14-0996 is requesting council approval to retroactively authorize the Department of Recreation and Parks to submit a 2014 Housing-Related Parks Program grant application and adopt the accompanying resolution which authorizes the city to apply for the 2014 round for this grant program and authorize the general manager of the Department of Recreation and Parks to accept the grant if awarded.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. And what is the grant used for? What does it do in our communities?
The Housing-Related Parks Grant Program, it's a great opportunity for the City of Los Angeles to be rewarded for its affordable housing developments. The State of California Department of Housing and Community Development offers grant funds to develop capital park projects based on the amount of affordable housing that the city develops. We've received this grant for the last 3 rounds and have received over $11 million and have funded 16 park projects. The notice of funding provides a development period. So based on that period, we work with our housing department to determine what affordable housing projects have been developed within that period. And the state has a calculation of to determine how much funding can be awarded based on the number of units, the number of bedrooms that are developed, and from that funding, we can fund our park projects. They encourage and offer additional bonuses for park projects that are located within park deficient and disadvantaged areas. So again, the city has benefited well over nearly $12 million, and if awarded this round, it would exceed $12 million for the park projects.
Thank you. This is precisely the business that we should be in. So thank you. Colleagues, without objection, or would you like to comment, Mr. Price?
Just one question, yes. So do we anticipate an award? How much are we going to be eligible for this round, you think?
This round, we've calculated about almost 600,000. The previous round, which covered several years, obviously gave us an opportunity to qualify for more funding. In fact, during the last round, we were the top recipient of that award. We received $8.2 million, I believe, throughout the state of California. So this round, based on the newly developed housing projects, we were only able to gather about 600,000.
Enough only for one project, looks like.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, without objection, we will move item 2 forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Atkinson. Colleagues, I recommend that we continue item 4 to be heard next time in committee. And then that brings, without objection, we'll continue item 4. And that brings us to item...
Not ready? Item 4 is not ready?
It's not. There is a document that just came to our attention, and the recommendation is that we continue the item. Do I have that right? Yeah.
Which we continue in?
Item 4. We're good with that? All right. So that brings us to item 6.
Item 6 is a motion, O'Farrell Krikorian, relative to instructing the Bureau of Engineering, the United States Army Corps of Engineers, and the City Administrative Officer to report on the current status of the Alternative 20 project proposal associated with the Los Angeles River Ecosystem Restoration Feasibility Study, the Army Corps and City's projected cost-share components of the Alternative 20 project, and any potential funding options.
Thank you. And Ms. Patty Hubert, if you could step forward and bring us up to speed.
Hi, I'm Patty Huber with the CAO's office. I can bring you up to speed at least on as relates to the funding components. I believe BOE is here on any of the issues relative to the actual project. Where we are in the process is the Army Corps is currently looking for the City of Los Angeles to submit a letter of intent and a certification of, I'll tell you the exact title of it just because I never remember. It's a self-certification of financial capability for decision documents. And my understanding is that that needs to be submitted by the end of this month or by early March in order for consideration of this project in June at the Army Corps level. Our office has some reservations with the proposal that we be asked to sign the self-certification. We do recognize that even the Army Corps has said it's non-binding. It doesn't commit us to a specific dollar amount. And at this time, negotiation of the cost-sharing component of this project is still underway with the Army Corps. I believe at the time that it was last in front of you for a decision on the Alternative 20, there was discussion of a 50-50 cost share. Different numbers have been floated around, and so that is all under discussion and negotiation with the Army Corps.
And Ms. Huber, the Army Corps and who?
My understanding, the mayor's office,
Okay.
but we are not participating in those conversations.
So there's a negotiation currently ongoing with the mayor's office and the Army Corps of Engineers.
Regarding the cost sharing for the project.
Thank you.
We were requested by the Bureau of Engineering. They brought it to our attention. They gave us a heads up in December. They brought it to us, and we looked at it, and we looked at some of the questions that the Army Corps has for an entity to ask itself in saying they're going to sign this self-certification. And we felt that as an office, a great level of discomfort at signing on to such a large project with such an unknown cost. And one of the issues as well was the number that was out there at the 50-50 share amount actually didn't include the cost of remediation, which would be an additional cost to the city. We are required to remediate the project or the properties before the Army Corps rehabilitates them. We have issued a memo. I believe you got it today, and we apologize for the short notice, but this has been a sort of evolving process to get to here. And we took a very high level, probably, 500,000 foot look at various options for the city to fund this. And Miguel Santana, the CAO, has indicated if the council and mayor conceptually can sign off on this framework, and it is a conceptual framework. You're not committing to doing any one of these things, but it is really to put in front of you a sense of some of the actions that you as council members or future council members over the course of the life of this project are likely going to have to face. If you're willing to give him, some sense that you understand sort of the financial lift that's in front of you, then he would, and direct him to do so, he would sign. But if and the financial framework includes some known funding sources, grants, cap and trade, the recent water bond. These are all just, at this point, general professional assessments. We haven't actually applied for a particular project or a particular amount. To the extent that one goes up, another one goes down, so on and so forth. But we also anticipate that at some point the city is going to have to look at a new funding source, external. And one thing that's not in here that could happen is other funding opportunities, other grant opportunities could come up. As those come up, we would anticipate the city would look at any and all new opportunities as well. And as you can see, even the Eifd is on there as a potential future funding source.
Thank you. So what I'd like to get to is what kind of lift we're now looking at. That's what we need to talk about. So Gary Lee Moore, I believe you can come up and address that a little bit. The both of you can, and Gary, you can give us your update. And I just want to state for the record that because there is a sense of urgency that was brought to my attention very, very recently, that I wanted the Army Corps to be able to present today as well. They were unable to with this short timeline. They were unable to commit. So I just wanted to put that out there. Otherwise, they'd be sitting here as well. But Gary Lee Moore, our city engineer, is here to...
So we get an assessment of these remediation costs that's has come up a couple times, and I think it's very significant given the amounts that we're being asked to look at, that we know the cost of property acquisition and remediation costs.
And in the report, I believe those numbers are in the long report, and I know the city attorney's office has culled some of those numbers out to address Mr. Cedillo's question. If we aren't able to articulate them now, then we can certainly do that soon. But Gary, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, council members, for allowing us to be here today. As far as the next steps with the Army Corps, we want to thank you for your unwavering support to this date of the feasibility study. It started in 2006, and the Army Corps has definitely, it's taken longer than we had all anticipated. Right now, as you've mentioned, I'll just outline a few of the final steps as we move forward here. The Army Corps has requested the letter of intent and the self-certification of financial capability by the mid-March timeframe. At that point, they will be submitting the report to regional headquarters in San Francisco. After that, about a month later, they plan on submitting that to the national headquarters in mid-April. If all that goes well, then they would schedule a Civil Works Review Board in June of 2015. It's our understanding that they have about 12 of these per year for the entire nation. Then there would be the public review of the final report from July to August, and then we would anticipate being back in front of this council with the environmental impact report, and that would contain the cost proposal of the Army Corps at that time. And we're anticipating that to be in September, October of 2015. Then there's another step called the Chief of Engineers report that would follow pending the city's approval in October. From there, we would need the study to be authorized, and that's done usually and in the history with the Water Resources Development Act. And so whenever we have another one of those. And then finally, you actually have to have money appropriated. And so that's kind of the upcoming steps. Cost, I would update you on in September of 23, the cost was approximately $1.08 billion for what we call Alternative 20. That time the council and overwhelming support from the public wanted us to go for that alternative, and that is still the preferred alternative in the study. The Army Corps in January has updated the cost, and they're now projecting that cost to be $1,350 million. And there's two primary areas that those cost increase have occurred, and it's really the ecosystem study is an 11-mile study. Starts just north of Griffith Park and goes down southward to about First Street. And that's then divided up in 8 reaches. So I apologize for being a little technical here. But in the reach that they call Reach 8, and that's the main street to First Street of the LA River, those costs increased about a little over $220 million. This is where the Los Angeles container terminal is located, and in order to relocate that, they had added cost for relocation of that business. The other cost is in stretch reach number 3, which includes the Verdugo Wash. That increased by $76 million. Once again, relocation of the private industry. I do, on a good note,
$76 million, right?
I'm saying there was an increase in that reach. So the total cost, I'll back up, for Reach 8, they're projecting a $650 million. That's the where the Los Angeles container terminal is. And in Reach 3, commonly known as the Verdugo Wash area, that total cost is $267 million. That was an increase of $76 million. And we do have one good note on Reach 7, which includes the Arroyo Seco confluence, actually reduced by $30 million because there are less soil removal, and that's about $63 million. So that gives you a little bit about the cost increase.
And it's my understanding from the PowerPoint that I saw that was provided to me by the Army Corps is that the cost share ranges from 72 to 88% local cost share, which ranges from the $900 million to $1.1 billion, if I'm have those figures roughly
Yes.
right. And it's my understanding that that is what will go into the final draft.
Staff met Dr. Carol Armstrong and Michael.
Notwithstanding the negotiations that
Right.
I don't really know much about, but yeah.
Right. Last week, the numbers were changing somewhat in a 2-day meeting again last week with the Army Corps. But I do believe, as you outlined, the Army Corps is one of the financial option is what they're saying is the cost would be capped at alternative 13. And as you said, about 1.1, I think you said. And the other one is that the city, the other option, once again, would be about $970 million. Those are approximately the two options that are being proposed right now. But as you well know, everybody's fighting for the best deal possible.
Oh, sure.
And we're really hoping that working together, these won't be the final cost numbers.
And so, do you have any more
No,
to add,
sir.
Mr. Moore? Thank you. So you were kind of going into the reason. The reason is basically land acquisition and then the cost of moving a business, for example, Union Pacific at Piggyback, right?
That's correct.
Are those the main reasons for the costs?
The land cost was, my understanding is, and the team can correct me, but the land cost was included. The costs that were not included in the September of 23 were really the relocation of the
costs.
businesses. There'll be a term that everybody hears about, yes, and that's they didn't include those in the 2013 numbers.
Has the city already agreed to those relocation costs in previous commitments, to your knowledge, or is that something that's on the table?
That's something that's still on the table. And once again, cost that it's right now, is my understanding in the study, is the city is responsible for acquiring the land and the relocation. So if the city is able to acquire the land less expensive, find relocation, then that would be a savings that would be realized for the city.
And I mean, it's my intent that we figure out a way forward here. I don't want anyone to get me wrong here. What if we're not successful in these negotiations, and we're looking at next fall, and we're looking at a $1 billion plus or minus commitment? Any sort of plan B or alternate way forward that you are looking at?
Well, I think the city would always be looking to exhaust all and any possibilities that may be there through the legislative process on the federal level. I think by all means possible, everybody would be looking forward to us fighting for the best deal possible.
And are you all in your negotiations looking at reach-by-reach sort of conversations about getting the cost share into a more of a parity that we've felt we had committed to all along since the summer of 2013? To get us down to the roughly 50-50 match?
Yeah, I don't know on the specifics on those reach-by-reach negotiations or negotiations in general. I do know that it's important for everybody to recognize that when this project is authorized, this will be implemented. One, the city has to have the purchase the property, get it ready. But secondly, the federal government has to appropriate the funding. So it's a multi-year process, giving us a chance to prioritize in the different areas and those that are financially easier to obtain, I should say.
And I guess I should have fine-tuned my question a little better. It seems to me that the reaches that we might be able to strike a better balance on are the Piggyback and the Verdugo Wash. And it sounds like the other ones, we actually have somewhat of a benefit on the Arroyo Seco piece, and it sounds like the other ones are kind of, as good as we can get them.
I would say that I never give up.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
But they're definitely, when you're talking lower numbers, there's greater opportunities, I think, to be creative.
Okay. And so how time certain do we feel the deadline is? Because the first time I heard about this letter of financial commitment, it was I think, right after the new year, and it was my understanding that council approval wasn't needed at all. Then it was learned that it was definitely needed, and here we are in, late February. And so we've lost a good, 5 or 6 weeks on this where we could have maybe acted a little faster. How certain do you feel this deadline is? Because we're going to probably need to do a little more work on this to get this through.
Well, I'll be glad to approach the Army Corps about any time that they can give us in this process. The date we were given originally was the end of this month. In reaching back out to them last week, we were able to extend it to the mid-March time frame. but I'll be glad to reach out to Colonel Colleton and her team again to see if we can have any additional time.
Because it's my understanding that, and forgive me for not knowing the exact name of this report, but there is an action in June that the local office takes. So it seems to me that if we could just, we may not need much more time at all, but if we could sort this out and give the Army Corps what it needs so that we keep within the timeline, it would seem reasonable that we wouldn't put that June deadline in jeopardy to then reach the fall or October deadline for the final adoption of the General's report, right?
Right. I mean, we have no problem if they're able to give the city more time. We'll ask again. I spoke to them last week about it. We'll be glad to approach them again because what they're saying is they need, they put the mid-March because they need a month to get it in through their regional headquarters, and then there's 60 days in order to get it in front of their time frame of June.
Okay.
So once again, that's why everybody's, so that we'll be glad to ask.
Okay. And then in terms of, Ms. Scanlon, I appreciate you saying that this isn't legally binding, but anytime the City Council puts something in black and white and it's
We
a
understand.
cost share agreement where we're basically saying, yes, we accept and can meet the financial responsibility of $1 billion to a project that when there's a document signed by the mayor, it speaks volumes. So could you expand a little bit in terms of what that means and what the possibilities are down the line in terms of the absolute commitment that we're making? And Gary, maybe you can chime in on that one too.
Yes, I was looking, there it is. It says, it's called the self-certification of financial capability for decision makers. And I think it's one on the document, it says, the last sentence says, I understand that the government's acceptance of this self-certification shall not be construed as obligating either the government or the non-federal sponsor to implement a project. I think that sentence really speaks for itself. I do agree that it says we have the capability, but it's very clearly in the last sentence says it does not obligate either the government or the non-federal sponsor to implement a project.
And we absolutely acknowledge that. But one of the documents that we sort of found as we were looking at this was a document from the Corps that said the financial capability guide, and it had a series of questions that it asked you to ask yourself to be able to sign this document. And in looking at those questions, Miguel just had a reluctance to sign this document absent some acknowledgement from the mayor and council that we are going to have to look at a lot of ways to fund this, and directed staff to come up with a very high-level conceptual framework of various funding sources for your consideration. Some of the questions is, have appropriations been approved and made available from your existing revenues? Will conditions specified in state or local appropriation measure be met? Regarding our general obligation and revenue bonds, will a referendum be required to levy taxes or sell bonds? Is state approval needed to levy those bonds? Has an application for a grant or loan funds been approved? These were questions that they said, ask yourself as you're signing this. And as we're asking ourselves, we're like, we can't really say that we've done these actions or are in a place to say we have money to fund this. And we look at it in the context of all of the issues going on with the budget, all the priorities that the city has to and is looking to meet. all of the issues that we're dealing with in various issues, from sidewalks to just the needs of the city as relates to its streets, to all of the priorities that are coming in front of us. And there are very challenging priority decisions to be made by this and future councils over the course of this project. And so the thought was just to have some agreement that, or acknowledgement really, that we're going to have to look at a variety of funding sources to get there, that the general fund is really not sufficient to meet the needs of this project, and that there may be a need at some point, depending on the timing of these projects, to go forward and look for a new revenue source, be it the EIFDs, be it looking at our own stormwater pollution abatement assessment fee and making an increase to that, revisiting the county assessment fee that was under consideration a year or so at the Board of Supervisors, as restarting discussions in that area, up to and including potentially looking at a new general obligation bond similar to our existing Prop O as a potential alternative way to look for funds for this project. So we tried to be far-reaching.
And all that's in your report. Those options are all in
Those
your
are all in our report. Those are, those are not set in stone numbers. You just heard a conversation on the EIFD. It's going to be a long process to get there. The number that we put there is a ballpark.
Right. And just let me state for the record, the intent was never, ever to make this an either-or conversation, sacrifice city services for the, so that's not where...
we never
Oh, and I know
that
you're not, but I just want to say for the record, that's not where I'm going either, and that's not where we're going. We'll, figure out a way forward is where I'm going. But we need to make sure that we ask the right questions and that we get briefed perhaps more regularly on the negotiations, because that's news to me. And I would love to be included on that, or this panel. We should I think, be briefed on that, quite frankly. And that's what I would request moving forward. So that'll be helpful. All right, having said it, colleagues, questions?
Can I just ask a question, Gary? On the Southern Pacific, now Union Pacific yard off of Mission Road, how big is that a priority for you?
Well, you have to factor in financial resources.
I know, but I mean,
And,
yeah.
and I think a lot of us have, it's not the number one priority. It really, you have to look at the money and availability.
Absolutely, but also the job loss that's there, and
Absolutely.
turning it over, what can be done. I mean, all I was just thinking, trying to solve this, Mitch, is if there was a zoning veil over that parcel that say, if in the event the parcel is ever subdivided, the city has some way to get into the discussion legally at some time to do whatever. If that was all housing, and I call it Park La Brea East, with a whole river theme coming in, something like that. And also I wanted to ask, on your stretches, the 9 points of light, is that what you have?
8 points. But
8 points, 8 points. Do you have, I don't see enough connection between the river and Elysian Park or the river and Griffith Park, as much as I would like to see. And I'm looking at Dr. Armstrong, see if there's something we can do. We got to get reclaimed water to Elysian. I think that's real important. And what that may bring will also bring something. And the one water issue is so important, because the water is really what the trick is, and yet we need to use water so wisely. And right now the water's going out to sea. Can we keep it for you and me? That's a bumper sticker on the back of DWP, huh? Now, there's the other thing, too. Just got to ask lastly on the issue. The area between Elysian Park at the San Fernando Road and Riverside Drive, all the way to Travel Town, that's open body.
yes.
Does that satisfy you? Do you feel deprived, or do you feel good that it's there? Because what I used to tell our former colleague, Mr. Reyes, concentrate where that's livable right now in the sense of what we're on. That's discoverable. Because we could dream, but we may dream before we could actually afford to pay for it. And the only thing I really ask, I'd love to see, Mr. Chairman, is a check dam, like there used to be one out by the spreading basins, where they took the water and they spread it. Fine. Just have a check dam south of the 6th Street Bridge so you get the water, then sanitation can pull the trash out. So then we're not dumping on Long Beach. And I think if you see water, you're stronger than if you don't. And so seeing the water across the plain, the river was full of water yesterday, about 2 or 3 inches wide, and it was very good to see that because of the storm that we had midday. I rest my case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LaBonge. And I'm thinking if we get the federal funding that we are seeking, and if we get EIFDs off the ground, there certainly could be a funding source for check dams. Just saying. All right, so, Mr. Price, Mr. Cedillo? All right. All right, so what I'd like to do is I'm going to continue the item, pending report back from the CLA on these escalated costs with a detailed financial analysis, and refer to Budget and Finance with a sense of urgency, and perhaps even have a co-meeting with Budget and Finance so that we can expedite this and meet the deadline.
Okay.
That's what I'd like to do that. I'm going to refer to Budget and Finance and then continue the item, and we may even have a special meeting. We may even convene a special meeting, maybe even 2,
Okay.
because we want to move quickly on sorting this out so we can move
And
forward.
we are more than happy to work with the CLA on the report back.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And I think when we come back also, Gary, just keep in mind, when I had a good conversation with Army Corps this morning, they were able to come this morning and just meet with me, but it was brought to our attention that we have to be policy compliant on the letter of financial capability. So I want to maybe work with you directly on that piece of it before, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it's my understanding that that's a critical piece that isn't necessarily ready for prime time just quite yet. So we'll figure that out too.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. So there is one general, thank you so much, both of you, thank you. One general comment card from Mr. Hayes.
My incessant theme is going to be train, Crenshaw LAX train. Garcetti now is pointing out they're going to have comments you can write in to talk about having a train stop at LAX. I thought that's what the Crenshaw line was supposed to do. No, it doesn't. You know that. So now they're talking about putting a train stop at LAX. But 2 years ago, I was there when the airport talked about having a train at LAX. It's a federal thing. It's not, has nothing to do with the city of LA. But back to the train. Aging. The train comes up at the boundary of Herbert Weston's district, Vernon, and it goes past the senior housing that Angelus Church has built, which houses maybe 300, 400 seniors. Up the street from there is the Institute for the Junior Blind, and at Slauson, there's another school. All those people are very subject to not being as careful as they might be. Speaking of care, here's a bus and the train. These are well-trained safety people. They have hundreds of people in their care that had an accident. A police car and a train. It's taken out 3 police cars. This is just Bishop 1. So 100 people have been killed by it, and our politicians decide to put a train on the ground. I don't have to say much more, except you know the point. It should never have been done, and it has to be undone. We will not tolerate this train running on the ground through our neighborhood. We will not do that. It has devastated the environment. All the trees have been cut down. We will not tolerate it. See you next time.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.